guys, today it's time for the most important ranking of the year, and I'm going to be sharing with you my top 15 palettes of 2022. Now I'm going to do this in a way that I always do it, so maybe this title is a bit misleading, maybe it's a little bit clickbaity, but what I usually do in this series, I will today rank my palettes from the number 15 up until the number 6 spot, and then with my 5, 4, 3, and 1, I will do dedicated videos where I do a look with all of those palettes and I will kind of reveal them one by one. I think we're gonna go ahead and start on the bottom. Now, obviously all of these palettes are amazing palettes and I feel really bad for some of the brands and palettes that I left out, but I had to pick some, and these are just the ones that ended up here, and I feel like a lot of other ones I could have made a case for putting into these, but honestly, these are the palettes that I look at and I want to reach for again, and I feel like that is what really says something. So a lot of this comes down to color stories. I don't know what else to tell you. I really do feel bad for some of the palettes and brands that didn't make it in here that I feel like deserve to, but these are just the palettes that I'm the most excited about. And this just comes down to my personal preferences and the way that I like to do my makeup and the kind of formulas that I enjoy. So let's just go ahead and start. So in the number 15 spot, so this is the 15th best palette of 2022. This is a palette that I wouldn't say it's this brand's best palette necessarily, but it's probably one of my favorite palettes from this brand. And this is the Unearthly Cosmetics Vitality palette. I don't know if this is still available. I feel like with Unearthly, a lot of their palettes kind of go in and out of stock all the time, and you never know when they discontinue something, when they're going to be bringing it back. You just never know. So I will leave links to all of these palettes down below, as well as my codes next to them if you're interested in picking any of these up. And I will also make sure to write next to my link if there is a link, if it's available or not. But maybe click on the link anyway, just to like check if you're interested, because maybe it's been restocked by the time you're seeing this. So this is what the palette looks like, and I think that a lot of people, myself included, were a little bit confused by the formulas in here, because I felt like the mattes in this palette are not as kind of rich and opaque as some of the larger pans from Unearthly. And even though that is the case with this palette, I still think it's absolutely usable. It just takes a little bit longer to build up the shades. But like I said before, this is more of a color story for me, and I also just feel like the shimmers in this palette are better than the shimmers in the larger pans from Unearthly. And I've said that for a very long time, and I don't know if it has something to do with the way that they're pressed, because the size of the pan is different, so maybe they're using a different pressing machine, maybe they're using different pressure, I don't know, but I always feel like the shimmers in the smaller pans are just a little bit looser and easier to pick up on a brush, and I feel like they just look nicer on the lids. I don't know, maybe that is just me, but I really love this palette. I think the color story is done so well. There are so many things you can do with this, and the looks I did with this palette were some of my favorite looks that I've done all year, and I felt like this palette really deserved to be in this video just because of how much fun I had with this palette. Like, I didn't want to put this palette down, and that is what feels like to me is one of the important things that I need to consider when doing these ranking videos, is not just like, you know, the performance of the palette, but also how willing I am to want to use it again. The next palette here was a palette that I felt like I went back and forth on whether or not I wanted to put this into the top 15, because color story wise, I feel like I like the other palettes a little bit more, but I still really like this color story, and I just think that the quality of this is so good that I felt like I really had to mention it. And every time I open it and I look at it, it makes me want to use it, even though there are maybe other things that I would like to use more, but it just needed to be in this. And this is the Hela palette from Odens Eye. It's the collaboration that they did with Angelica. I'm sure you've all seen this palette. This is no longer available. I think after Black Friday, which I am filming this after Black Friday, I think that she said that this was getting discontinued. So sadly not available anymore, but a beautiful palette nonetheless. And I'm so happy that I have it. So happy for Angelica. This palette deserved to be in one of the best palettes of the year, in my opinion. Let's move on to a palette that every time I look at this, I just get annoyed, but I always get so happy at the same time. I know that's very contradicting, and you're probably like, what do you mean? But this is a Plouise palette, and I have such a love-hate relationship with Plouise because their packaging is just so annoying and so bulky, but damn, the palettes are so good. This is the Watch the Queen Qonquer palette, and this is the palette that has a chessboard in the middle. It's just so stupid and unnecessary, and I hate having to deal with it. And the fact that there are like two palettes in here that are on opposite sides of the chessboard, so you can't really use them both at the same time, it annoys the crap out of me. But the shades in this and the quality of the shades is just amazing. So I just felt like, because I have used this a lot, I needed to put it in here. I also feel like their shimmers are getting so much better. I mean, this is such a big improvement from the Worldly palette, which I did put super high up in my ranking the year that I used that one. And I feel like their formula just keeps getting better. And even though this side of the palette is not my favorite, I think it's really pretty. The side that I've used the most is definitely this one, and I've used this palette so much. I even brought this palette traveling with me. I put this monstrosity of a palette in a suitcase. This took up like half of my suitcase, I'm not even kidding. But it was worth it because the looks I did with it, the amount of fun I had with this palette, the versatility that I had with this, totally worth it. I have no regrets. Next up, some of you might have expected this to end up a little bit higher, if I had to guess, but this is from Unearthly, and this is the All I Ever Wanted Volume 2 palette. I love this palette. This is such a good all shimmer palette. Sadly, I think this has been discontinued. At least that's what I gathered after I filmed my ranking all of my best shimmer palettes in my collection. I will link that if you want to check it out, but when I went to link this, I couldn't find it anymore, which is so sad. But like I said before, you never know with Unearthly. They might bring this back. I hope they do. It's an amazing palette. I think that all of the shades in here are so beautiful. I don't have any complaints with this at all. The only reason it didn't end up higher on my list is because I wish there were some iridescent shades in this, and I also feel like this is more of a color story maybe than some of the other all shimmer palettes that I have. So there's a lot of purples, greens, and blues and golds in here and not much else. And even though I love that, I like that this is more of a color story, I don't feel like this is the most versatile all shimmer palette that I own, but the quality of this is fantastic. And of course, the quality of all of these palettes are going to be amazing, otherwise they wouldn't have made it into the top 15. So that is also the case with the next palette, and this one is also not available anymore. I'm so sorry, but it's not my fault that all of the best palettes are getting discontinued. So I still need to talk about them because they are one of the best palettes of the year. This is the Christmas Eve palette from Odens Eye. I think that Odens Eye absolutely knocked it out of the park with their Christmas palettes, and I think that being someone who grew up in Norway, Odens Eye is a Swedish brand, I can really see their inspiration, and I feel like we have the same idea of what Christmas is when it comes to color stories. So when I see this, I see a very kind of winter wonderland, but also kind of cozy Christmassy palette, and I feel like that is exactly what this is. I think it's so beautiful. I think that all of the shades in here are amazing. I really want to use this more. I'm gonna definitely bring this out again, especially in the winter time. I feel like this is gonna be perfect, and I just think that they did such a good job with this. Like I'm just more and more excited every time I know that Odens Eye is coming out with a new collection, because I just know they're gonna knock it out of the park. The next palette is a palette that, I'll be honest, I've said this before, but this is from a brand that I'm on their PR list, and when I saw them sneak peek this palette, I honestly was like, I really hope they don't send me this. Because I am not the biggest fan of Barbie. This is a Barbie palette from Ringlight. I really don't like Barbie. I have absolutely no connection to Barbie. I never used to play with Barbies. I think they're childish. I'm sorry, but I don't really want my makeup to be Barbie themed. But damn, is this palette so good, and I hate how good it is. Because I hate the theme. If the theme of this was different, I feel like this would have ended up even higher. But I really feel like they did something with this palette. I feel like when I first saw this, I was like, yeah, that's nice. But then having it in my hands, having really like dug into this palette and seen what I can do with this palette, I love this color story. I think it's so nice. And I think that despite it being a large palette, they managed to curate a color story within it being a very large palette. And sometimes I feel like with big palettes, brands just kind of throw in a ton of shades and hope for the best. But I feel like whoever did this really thought this through and came up with something that is very user-friendly, is something you can do a lot with. It seems like it was thought through in a way that the person who made this actually likes to do their own makeup, and I don't always feel like that, but I just think this palette is so well done that it had to make it up high. The next palette is from a brand that is a very new brand. This is a brand that I tried for the first time this year. I think that they came out with their first palette this year. And I think that if this is what they're doing in the beginning, I can't wait to see where they go because they have been killing it this year. And this is the Fantasy Cosmetica's Sorcerer palette. I really enjoy their other two palettes as well, but I like this one the most out of them. And I think it's because I really like the combination of the mattes and the shimmers in this. And I feel like there are so many things you can do with this palette despite it only being a 9-pan. And usually I'm not the biggest fan of it's not that I'm not a fan of smaller palettes, but I think what I was trying to say is that smaller palettes don't usually tend to end up very high in my rankings because I feel like they're usually kind of limiting, but I feel like for being a 9-pan, there's just so much you can do with this. And I love the formula of all of these shades. I think it's just so fun. And I'm just really excited about this brand. I can't wait to see what they do next year. Next up is a palette that I don't think any of you are really going to be surprised, but some of you might be surprised that this color story ended up as high as it did. And this is a Blend Bunny palette. Now, I will admit that not all of my Blend Bunny palettes have made it into my top 15, and I will kind of explain that as I go along in my other videos, but I just feel like I had to pick the palettes from Blend Bunny that I feel like I like the most color story wise and the palettes that I have reached for the most personally. And even though the quality of all of the Blend Bunny palettes that I have are fantastic, I do have to consider my own preferences when it comes to my rankings. So this is actually the All Done Up palette. Now, a lot of you are going to be like, but that is such a neutral palette, Annette. Yeah, because I've been kind of into that this year. I'm not even sorry. I think this palette is so beautiful. And when I filmed this video the first time, when my microphone wasn't on, I tried to kind of explain why I like the All Done Up palette more than I like the Dollhouse palette. So I will show them side by side. So I feel like for me, this palette it's not that it's more punchy, but I feel like this is more of a toned down version, I guess, of a neutral palette. Even though it has like those dark shimmers or dark mattes, I just feel like there's something about this one that is a little bit more me than this one. And it's hard for me to explain exactly why that is, but I also feel like a lot of these are kind of like mauve tones, and I don't like mauve eyeshadow. I will be the first one to admit that I think it looks absolutely horrible on me, and I think it looks like I got punched in the eye. And I know everybody else loves mauve eyeshadows, but I hate them. I really dislike them. It's probably my least favorite color of eye makeup when it comes to eyeshadow. I just don't like them. So for me, I feel like these are the kind of tones that I like to go for when it comes to neutrals. I really like these kind of mustardy browns up here. I think they're beautiful. These kind of murky greens are so pretty. I really like the grays in this palette as well. I feel like that is a really nice inclusion. These greens are very unique to my collection, and the shimmers in here are just amazing. They're so good. I feel like they're really improving on their shimmer formula from palette to palette, and these are just so much better than any of the other shimmers that they've ever come out with. So this palette did end up really, really high in the ranking for that reason. Speaking of shimmers, the next palette is an all shimmer palette, which you guys know I'm so into right now. And I think the reason why this is the one that ended up this high is because it's probably the one that I've used the most this year. And it's also one of my newer palettes. I want to say I've had this for maybe 2 months now. And I don't think I've reached for any other palettes over a 2-month span as much as I have with this one. So this is the Angles of Illumination palette from, Angles of Illumination 3 palette, I should say, from Bella Beauty Bar. And here's what the palette looks like. And I think the reason why I love this palette so much as an all shimmer palette is because a lot of these shades are very light to mid-tone, which I really prefer that. It has some iridescent shades in here that can be used for inner corner shades. These two are beautiful face highlighters. Like, you wouldn't look at this and think it's a face highlighter, but it works so well. This shade is so beautiful. This shade is so beautiful. All of these wear so well on me. I don't have many problems with creasing. They just look incredible, and I love this palette so, so much. Now, the palette in my number 6 spot, I really, really, really wanted to put this into my top 5, but when I looked at all of the palettes that I have in my top 5, I just couldn't justify it. Like, I just felt like if I were to want to use one of these palettes, I would choose those 5 over this one. And I think the reason for that is because this is also a very new palette, and so many new palettes have come out in the past 6 months, even in the past 3 months. I feel like all the brands really stepped it up with their kind of holiday releases and fall releases this year. That this one just didn't manage to quite make it into the top 5. And this is the Glamorous palette from Glaminatrix. This is such a pretty palette, but also, like I was saying, I just did my review with this, so I have played with this quite a bit very recently, and I feel like I'm just more likely to want to reach for these other palettes that you will see in my top 5, because I just haven't maybe played with those as recently as I have with this one. But this is such a beautiful palette. I love the color story. I really, really enjoy Glaminatrix's formula. I think that they keep improving and keep getting better and better. And I feel like they're kind of going along with what I like in my formulas all the time. So that's perfect for me, because they're kind of changing their preferences in the same direction as I am. So I really enjoy this palette. I think it's beautiful. I don't really have anything to complain about. I think it's just a very, very well done palette. But like I said, I would rather play with the other palettes that I have in my pile of 5 palettes in front of me over these 10 that I showed you in this video. And I am wearing the number 5, why is this so hard to say? The 5th best palette of 2022 on my eyes today. So this will probably be my next video where I show you the palette, I show you how I did the look. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Were you surprised by any of these? Let me know. Also let me know what would your top 10 be, unless you wanna kind of go along with my top 5 and share one palette at a time in the videos when I'm doing them. I would love for you to do that as well. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you want to see some more ranking videos, I of course have a ton up on my playlist up on the screen. And if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.